Welcome to the channel. This is more than just videos. This is a space for motivation, growth, and positive energy. If you're ready to improve yourself and stay inspired every day, make sure to subscribe and join this journey with me.
On a Thursday evening in late October, my wife walked through the front door of our home, set her laptop bag on the kitchen counter, and headed straight for the bedroom without saying a word to me. I was sitting at the dining table going over some quarterly projections, and she passed me like I was a piece of furniture. After 19 years of marriage, I had learned to read the silence. This wasn't the tired silence of a long workday. This was the careful silence of someone managing a secret. Her name is Sandra, mine is Michael. And for the better part of that year, I had been watching my wife slowly become a stranger. We had built something real together. Not just a marriage, but a business. 14 years ago, we co-founded a mid-sized logistics consulting firm in Charlotte, North Carolina. I handled operations and finance. Sandra ran client relations and business development. We were good at it. We complemented each other. At least, that's what I believed for a long time. The first sign came 8 months before that October evening. Sandra started taking calls in the garage. She said it was because she needed quiet. I didn't push back. I trusted her. That trust, I would later realize, was the most expensive thing I ever gave away for free. Then came the business trips. She had always traveled for client meetings, maybe once every 6 weeks. By spring, she was traveling twice a month, sometimes 3 times. I asked her once, gently, whether the workload was getting too heavy. She smiled and said the firm was growing and I should be happy about that. I smiled back and let it go. What I didn't let go was a strange charge on our joint business credit card. Dinner for 2 at a restaurant in Atlanta on a night she claimed to have been in back-to-back client dinners alone. I didn't say anything. I wrote it down in a small notebook I kept in my desk drawer and went back to work. My name is Michael Hartley. I am 51 years old. I have a son named Daniel who was 23 at the time and working his first real job in Denver. I am not an emotional man by nature. I am methodical. I solve problems the way I approach spreadsheets, carefully, column by column, without skipping ahead. And when I began to suspect that my wife was having an affair, I did not confront her. I did not raise my voice. I sat down, opened a new document on my laptop, and started collecting facts. The man's name was Derek Calloway. He was 47, a senior partner at one of our largest client accounts, a supply chain firm based in Atlanta. Sandra had managed that account for 3 years. He was married, had 2 teenage daughters, drove a white Range Rover, and had a LinkedIn profile full of motivational quotes about leadership. I found all of this within 40 minutes on a Tuesday afternoon while Sandra was at a spin class. I want to be clear about something. I am not a man who goes looking for drama. I had spent nearly 2 decades being the steady, quiet presence in our marriage. I worked hard. I was faithful. I was payful. I was present. I went to Daniel's baseball games even when I had a board call at 7 in the morning. I remembered Sandra's mother's birthday every single year, before Sandra did. I was, by almost any measure, a good husband. And the reward for all of that was a wife who was slowly, quietly dismantling everything we had built so she could hand pieces of it to someone else. Because it wasn't just the affair. I discovered that part in late September, about 6 weeks before that silent October evening. What took me another 2 weeks to uncover was something far worse. Sandra had been consulting with an attorney, not a divorce attorney, a corporate restructuring attorney. She had been exploring what it would take to transfer her ownership stake in our firm, 49% of everything we had built, into a separate holding entity. An entity that, based on the paperwork I found on her laptop while she slept one Friday night, listed Derek Calloway as a co-director. She wasn't just cheating on me. She was planning to walk away with half my company and hand it to her boyfriend. I stood in our home office at 2 in the morning reading that document on her screen with a glass of water going warm in my hand, and I felt something settle in my chest. Not rage. Something colder than rage. Clarity. The kind of clarity you only get when you finally understand exactly what you are dealing with. I took photos of every page with my phone. Then I closed the laptop exactly as I had found it and went to bed. I want to explain what I did next, because I think it matters. A lesser man might have stormed into that bedroom and thrown her out that night. I understand that impulse. But I had been in business long enough to know that the person who moves first without full information almost always loses. Sandra had been planning this for months. She had a lawyer. She had a strategy. And she believed, with complete confidence, that I had no idea any of it was happening. That was her single greatest mistake. The next morning, I called my attorney, a woman named Patricia Walsh who had handled our firm's legal work for the better part of a decade. I asked for a meeting outside the office at a coffee shop downtown. I told her everything. I laid the photos of the documents on the table and watched her read them with the expression of someone who had seen this before, but still found it distasteful. Patricia told me that what Sandra was attempting was legally complicated but not impossible, and that the window to stop it required moving quickly on several fronts simultaneously. We spent 3 hours at that coffee shop. By the time I drove home, I had a plan. Over the next 4 weeks, I executed that plan with the same patience and precision I brought to everything else in my life. I worked quietly, methodically, and I told no one except Patricia and one other person, our firm's chief financial officer, a man named Gary Moss who had been with us since the beginning and who, when I showed him what Sandra was doing, set his coffee mug down very slowly and said, "Tell me what you need." The first thing I did was document everything. Every business trip Sandra had taken in the past year, cross-referenced against her corporate card statements. Every call she had made from her work phone to Derek's number. There were 112 of them over 7 months. I also hired a private investigator, a retired Charlotte Mecklenburg detective named Ron, who within 10 days provided me with photographs and a detailed log that left absolutely no room for interpretation. The second thing I did was restructure my own legal position in the firm before Sandra could do it first. Patricia filed the necessary paperwork to formalize certain provisions in our original operating agreement that, until then, had existed only as handshake understandings. In plain terms, if either partner attempted to transfer their ownership stake without mutual written consent, the stake would revert to the other partner. Sandra had never paid close attention to the legal filings. That had always been my department. The third thing I did was call my son. Daniel answered on the second ring. He had his mother's voice, quick and warm, and for a moment I almost lost my composure. I told him I needed to talk to him about something serious, and that I needed him to listen before he reacted. He was quiet for the entire 10 minutes it took me to explain. When I finished, he said, "Dad, what do you need me to do?" I told him to stay in Denver, keep his head down, and not contact his mother until I told him it was safe to do so. He didn't ask why. He trusted me. That meant more than I knew how to say. The fourth thing I did was wait. Sandra came home on a Wednesday evening in early November carrying dry cleaning and a good mood that I recognized immediately as the particular brightness of someone who had just spent time with a person they were in love with. She kissed me on the cheek in the kitchen and asked where I wanted for dinner. I said whatever she was making sounded good. She made pasta. We sat across from each other at the dinner table and talked about a client meeting she had coming up the following week. I asked questions. I listened. I refilled her wine. I knew that the transfer paperwork was scheduled to be filed the following Monday. Patricia had confirmed this through her contact at the filing office. Sandra had set everything in motion. The holding company documents were ready. Derek was ready. As far as Sandra was concerned, by Tuesday of the following week, she would own a legally protected stake in our firm that her husband would have no clean way to contest. She had not checked the operating agreement revision that had been filed 3 weeks prior. On Friday morning, 2 days before the filing was supposed to happen, I asked Sandra if she had time for coffee before her 9 o'clock. She said sure and sat down at the kitchen table in her robe. I set a cup in front of her and sat across from her and put a manila folder on the table between us. She looked at the folder, then she looked at me. I told her she should open it. She opened it. The first page was a summary of the revised operating agreement provision. The second page was a copy of the filing confirmation. The third page was a printed email exchange between her and Derek from 6 weeks earlier discussing the transfer timeline. The fourth page was one of Ron's photographs. Sandra set the folder down very carefully. She did not speak for a long time. Then she said, quietly, that she could explain. I told her that she didn't need to. I told her that I wasn't there to have an argument. I told her that I had loved her for 19 years and that some part of me probably still did, which made what she had done hurt in ways I wasn't going to describe at a kitchen table over coffee. I told her that the transfer she had planned was not going to happen, that our attorney had already taken the steps necessary to prevent it, and that what happened next was entirely up to her. She could cooperate with a straightforward dissolution of the partnership and the marriage, or she could fight, and if she chose to fight, everything in that folder and the full investigative report that Ron had compiled, which was considerably more detailed than what she was currently looking at, would be submitted as evidence in what would become a very public proceeding. Sandra stared at me. Her face had gone through several things in the span of about 90 seconds. Surprise, calculation, something that might have been shame. And then, finally, The particular blankness of a person who has just realized they have lost before the game they thought they were winning had even officially started. She said, "You've been planning this for a while." I said, "Since the night I found the restructuring documents on your laptop." She asked me how long that had been. I told her 6 weeks. She looked out the kitchen window for a moment and then looked back at me. She said, "You sat across from me at dinner for 6 weeks knowing all of this?" I told her yes. She didn't say anything to that. What happened in the weeks that followed was not clean or simple. Divorce proceedings rarely are, and ours had the added complexity of a shared business, shared finances, and 19 years of interwoven life. But Patricia had done her work well, and the legal position I had established before Sandra made her move meant that she had very little leverage. The attempted transfer of her stake without my consent, documented and filed, was a material breach of our partnership agreement. Her attorney, a sharp woman from a firm in uptown Charlotte, knew it and made clear to Sandra early in the process that her best outcome was a negotiated settlement rather than a protracted fight. Derek Calloway was a different matter. When news of the situation reached his firm, and news does reach firms, particularly when a senior partner has been using company resources to manage a personal affair, the consequences were significant. His firm launched an internal review. I had no direct involvement in that process, but I was aware of it, and I will not pretend that I was unhappy about it. By January, Derek had resigned. His wife filed for divorce the same week. I don't know what happened to him after that, and I found, somewhat to my own surprise, that I didn't particularly care. What I cared about was the firm. Gary and I spent 3 months stabilizing operations after Sandra's departure. A few clients noticed the change in account management and asked questions. We answered them honestly, professionally, and without drama. We lost one mid-tier client. We retained everyone else. By spring, we had brought on 2 new accounts that more than compensated for the loss. There is something I want to say about the settlement, because I know it is the part people always want to know about. Sandra received a fair buyout for her partnership stake. Not generous. Fair. It was based on a professional valuation conducted by an independent firm, which is the method specified in our original operating agreement. She received what she was legally entitled to and not a dollar more. Whether that felt like justice to her, I have no idea. I stopped trying to manage her feelings about any of it sometime in December. Some people I've told this story to since then have asked why I didn't try to take more. Why I didn't use the affair evidence more aggressively. Why I didn't push harder to reduce her buyout. I'll tell you why. Because I had already won. Not in the vindictive, scorched earth sense that some men in my situation might want. I had won in the only sense that actually matters. I had protected what I built. The firm was intact. My son knew the truth. My own integrity was intact. My son knew the truth. My own integrity was intact. Sandra walked away with a fair settlement and the knowledge that her plan had failed completely. That I had known about it for 6 weeks before she filed a single document. That every move she made during those 6 weeks, I had already anticipated and countered. She had to sit with that. I didn't need to add anything to it. I moved out of the house in March into a 2-bedroom apartment about 4 miles from the office. It was smaller and quieter than anything I had lived in for 2 decades. And in the evenings when the workday was done, I found the quiet surprisingly easy to inhabit. Daniel flew in for a long weekend in April. We went to a Hornets game and ate too much barbecue and didn't talk about his mother very much. And on Sunday morning before his flight, he sat at my kitchen table with coffee and said, "You seem okay, Dad." I told him I was. He said he was glad. He flew home and I went back to work. I want to be honest about one thing. There were nights, early on, when I would lie in that apartment and feel the specific weight of 19 years. Not grief, exactly. Something adjacent to it. The weight of investing that much of yourself in something that turned out to be something other than what you believed it was. I don't think you get to skip that feeling. I don't think you should try. I let it sit with me on those nights, and then in the morning, I got up and made coffee and went to the office, because that is what you do. By summer, Sandra had moved to Atlanta. I heard this through a mutual acquaintance and did not ask for details. Gary and I promoted our head of client development, a woman named Teresa, who had been doing exceptional work for 3 years, and who took to the expanded role with a confidence that made me wonder why we had waited this long. The firm had its best third quarter in 5 years. I sent the whole team home early on a Friday in September and told them to enjoy the long weekend. I tell this story not because I think I am remarkable. I am not. I am a middle-aged man who found out his wife was cheating and tried to take the company at the same time, and I handled it the only way I knew how, which was carefully and without panic. The revenge, if you want to call it that, was not in anything dramatic. It was in the fact that everything she tried to take is still mine. The firm is still standing. My son still calls me every Sunday. And on a quiet evening in October, exactly 1 year after that silent walk down my hallway, I sat on my apartment balcony with a glass of bourbon and thought, without anger and without bitterness, that I had made it through the hardest year of my life with everything that actually mattered still intact. The lesson I would offer anyone who finds themselves where I was, staring at documents on a laptop screen at 2 in the morning, is this: do not move until you are ready. Do not let the anger move faster than you're thinking. The person who betrayed you is counting on your emotions to make you sloppy. Don't give them that. Get quiet. Get organized. Get counsel. And then, when everything is in place and not one moment before, make your move. Sandra made one fatal assumption throughout all of this. She assumed that because I had been steady and quiet for 19 years, I was not paying attention. She mistook patience for passivity. She mistook trust for naivety. She was wrong about all of it.